Hi, we're group number 22, the Jasper Bytes. For this project, our main goal is to design and change the digital world to make it more ethical. Our group specifically are interested in seeing how the spreading of misinformation on social media will affect people's perspective and what we can potentially change to fight against the misinformation online.
So naturally, all of us had really been exposed to misinformation, but we never had really taken a look at it from an academic point of view. So we wanted to really do a deep dive about all the information about misinformation that already exists online. We started off with Statista, and so we found this really interesting graphic about just like Facebook's engagement of the top 5 fake election stories. So as you can see, like it's really worrisome that like millions of people are engaging with just articles that are just not true. And so like at the bottom, it shows that more people sometimes engage with these fake news articles than like mainstream news articles. And like for a number of different reasons, maybe they back up their kind of point of view. Maybe just the titles are more sensational, and so just the clickbaitiness of it just makes things stand out and makes it easier to spread. Because of that, you can kind of see stats like this, where only 36% of people say they have somewhat or great trust in mass media to report news fully, accurately, and fairly. And so it's a big concern that only 36% of people have faith in such a crucial institution in like our democracy. And then a minus 18% change in trust of national news since 2016. But kind of like put things in perspective here, it's just terrifying that there's just one side there's so little trust of national news, and then on the other side it's somewhat justified just because of all the misinformation that exists out there. And then so the next big part of our project was the questionnaire, where we kind of just went through and just wanted to gather either like demographic information and just general like information about how people use social media for news and how people perceive trustworthiness of social media platforms. And so I won't go into every single piece of information we got from the questionnaire, but some of the big crucial ones that we found interesting were, I think one of the big things about misinformation is that we always perceive ourselves not to be misinformed. We also perceive others to be the ones that are misinformed. So a lot of times we have that uncle or aunt or even parent who is constantly like involved with misinformation or spreading misinformation. Here you see that 87% of people believe that they have a family member or friend who spreads misinformation online. And we wanted to see like which social media platforms were the biggest contributors to misinformation or perceived to be the biggest ones. And we found that Facebook and like YouTube were like perceived to be the biggest one. I feel like Facebook is usually the one that people default to because the social demographic for Facebook is a bit older than, like, let's say, Instagram or TikTok or Twitter. And so going off that, we also asked participants to kind of list social media platforms they use in order of how much they perceive them to be trustworthy. So at the top, you have Twitter and like YouTube, and then at the bottom, you have Parler and Snapchat. And so I think we kind of guessed that Facebook would be closer to the bottom, but it was kind of interesting to see that Facebook was somewhere towards the middle. I feel like this was a big question for us to kind of just get a grasp of how people perceive social media sites that they actually use.
After recording all of our in-depth interviews, although our sample size is small, we came to a few possible conclusions. So first off, most of our interviewees do not use social media specifically for news. They usually just use it to keep up with their friends and family's lives. People don't seem to trust Facebook with any of the news that it presents. Half of our interviewees specifically stated that they didn't trust Facebook. Interviewee number 2 said that there were too many controversies. Interviewee number 1 said that it feels very biased and that there are too many conflicting quote unquote facts. TikTok was also brought up once. It was stated to be the most unreliable social media source for news. The reason is that things change as the news goes around. So as it is shared with each individual person, sometimes it gets warped. That was stated by interviewee number 4. All of our interviewees gave different sources that they trusted the most. This illustrates how people as a group can have very different opinions on who they trust in the media and thus can get misinformed and have difficulty being unmisinformed, fixing that misinformation by finding more reliable sources in trusted places. Next, we asked a few questions about fact checking. 3/4 of our interviewees just Google the topic to fact check. If they do, interviewee number 1 said that if the news topic can't be found elsewhere, then the original is probably fake. I find this line of thinking to be a little bit dangerous because sometimes it could be the first article about it or something like that. But otherwise, outright found that our interviewees usually only fact check if the news piece is interesting or relevant specifically to them. After that, we went straight into misinformation itself. 3/4 of our interviewees have been misinformed at some point in time. They gave various reasons for how they were misinformed. Number 1 was by a family member. Number 3 was from Facebook, as we see again. And number 4 was just by peer gossip. So although not all of them have been misinformed, all of them know somebody who has been. And it's usually a family member. Wouldn't you know it? Facebook was involved in half of those situations. Nearly every situation was resolved by the interviewee themselves, so just communicating with the person that was misinformed. This is due to the trust between them and the misinformed, that they trust the interviewee to know what they're talking about. But not all people are willing to go back on their own opinions, as interviewee number 4's parents happen to still believe in the misinformation, despite the interviewee's best efforts. Lastly, we have the opinions on social media versus news sources, like online news articles, newspaper, or cable news, things like that. When comparing social media to news sources, although 3/4 of our interviewees tend to get more news from social media, they don't really trust it as much. So it's something our interviewees don't really use social media specifically to get news. They're just kind of exposed to it. And when they are, they don't really trust it because it seems a little bit exaggerated. And that is kind of how we get into this last bullet point, where interviewee number 3 said that they specifically prefer cable news because it isn't as exaggerated for clicks.
Now we will take a look at our personas that we developed based on the data we gathered from our questionnaire. This is Julie. She's a full-time business owner who enjoys using social media to consume content she enjoys. She doesn't use social media primarily for news, but sometimes she does read news articles that show up on her Facebook and Twitter feed. However, she does not have a lot of free time on her hands and doesn't have time to fact check what she reads and wishes there was a more efficient way to do so. This is Matthew. He's an undergraduate student who interns at a large tech company. He doesn't really keep up with the news, but his parents do, and they often read and share a lot of misinformation with him and their family and friends. Although he does his best to help his parents by showing them how the news they've been reading is incorrect, he is often busy and wishes there was an easier way for his parents to check their information themselves.
According to the feedback we got from our storyboard interview, our group eventually picked 2 of the best designed ones. So for the first storyboard is about providing fast and reliable facts. In the story, our character Michael has an intense working schedule that he does not have much time to check news on TV or radio. He is not very familiar with the social media platforms, but he gets annoyed by being misinformed. So our solution is that we designed an app called Checking News, which help to organize the trustworthy and high quality news from the mainstream media for the users to quickly access. So ideally, with the help of the app, Michael should be able to check the news quickly and does not need to worry about being misinformed. Our second storyboard is about debunking misinformation from family. In this story, Julie rarely used social media for any kind of news, while her family, however, managed to find those inaccurate news on the platforms like Facebook and always shares it to her. As a full-time business owner, she finds it tedious to have to constantly find sources to correct her family members on misinformation they send to her. She needs an easier way to check the facts. Based on the situation, we decided to create an app called Check Facts. With that, Julie can run the sent information through the app and see how reliable it is. And she will even be able to assess other sources as backups.
This is our mission statement. We strive to combat misinformation on social media as quickly and efficiently as possible, while helping to educate people on how to gauge the trustworthiness of the media they consume.